So how many people watched at least part of the Super Bowl on Sunday? Most people. So did anyone else stop watching at the end of the third quarter? So I don't really care about professional football. If it was the University of Michigan playing some sort of football game, I'd be like totally engaged because that's my team. But for professional football, seriously, the Super Bowl was the first game footage I've seen this season. So I haven't really been following it at all. But we went over to Grand Caley's, more for the people and the board games and the snacks and the commercials than for the actual football game, and that was fun. So, I was kind of tired, wanted to get home, get a good night's sleep, so we left while the Falcons were still creaming the Patriots. And go home, go to bed, and yesterday morning I wake up and find out that the Patriots won. And it was like the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history. Are you kidding? It would have been entertaining to watch, even though I'm not a huge professional football fan. It still would have been fun to watch that last quarter. Just would have had good entertainment value. Of course, I didn't know that when we left, and so my attitude toward the game at that time that we left was just kind of, meh. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I mean, I love this picture of if you opened up a fortune cookie and just said, meh. That'd be kind of disappointing. And, I thought about centering that and scaling it, but meh. So, I know the Super Bowl is really important to some people. Some people get really worked up about it and everything, and but the Super Bowl isn't actually important. I mean, if in the grand scale of things, we think about a godly perspective, an eternal perspective, no one was transformed by the Super Bowl and didn't have an impact on anybody's soul. Like, in the big picture, Super Bowl's not important. Now, if the Lions ever made it to the Super Bowl and then lost in overtime after being way ahead earlier in the game, and I said it wasn't important, Becca Welser, who most of you know because she just graduated in December, would probably spontaneously combust right there. She's a huge Lions fan. But still, it's just a game. It's just a football game. So man, that's football. The problem is, when it comes to my daily life, sometimes I'm kind of meh about things that actually are important. And, there's a lot of things in life that are important relative to other things. Like, getting good grades is more important than spending hours on Facebook and YouTube and Netflix. Hopefully. But in the grand scale of things, 100 years from now, nobody's going to care about that. Most of the decisions that we make, unless we choose to make some spiritual interactions within those decisions, 100 years from now, nobody's going to care. So those kind of things aren't important of themselves. But sometimes I'm just meh about things that really are important. And sometimes I feel like, things that are important are things that draw people closer to God, things that help people take their next steps with God, things that help expand the kingdom of God. Those are the things that are always important. They make a difference for eternity. But I still struggle with that meh. Sometimes I feel like skipping church. Sometimes I feel like skipping my personal time with God that day. A lot of times, I'd rather not participate in a service project. I'm not very good at initiating devotions with my family at times. Sometimes they're really good opportunities to build spiritual relationships, but I honestly don't feel like it at the time. I'm probably the only one that feels like that with things that are actually important, right? No. Unless you're always at 100% intensity for passion and things that really matter, every one of us can relate to those feelings of meh about things that actually are important, because meh happens. And it's contagious, which really stinks. If God draws you out of meh for a particular topic, and you get excited about it, and He leads you to start a prayer meeting, or to do a service project, or organize some special event where it could really have an impact on people, and you try to share your passion with others and tell them, recruit them to participate that, and then the response you get is, I don't know what I'm doing that night. It just kind of sucks all the energy and enthusiasm out of us. So that's one of, when it happens, it can fill us with self-doubt, drain our energy, and meh is one of Satan's best temptations, one of his best strategies against the advancement of God's kingdom. So how do we combat that? I believe there's a surefire solution to combating meh. You might think, really? Is it really that easy? Yes, really there's a solution. No, I didn't say it was necessarily easy for us. It's got two parts, and I'm going to share the first part now. The best cure for meh is to apply my faith. The best cure for meh is to apply my faith. Now, if you've not surrendered to the Lordship of Christ and responded in obedience to accept His gospel, that's the first step to applying your faith. But that's only the first step. And most of us in the room are way beyond that first step. But the same solution applies to us. The cure for meh is to apply my faith. So our faith is supposed to save us, but if that's all that our faith ever does, we're going to have that apathetic meh feeling across a lot of our lives if our faith stops at, I'm saved, I'm good to go. So, there's a great example recorded in the New Testament. What does it look like to apply my faith? We're going to look at an example, and this can help us gain a vision for applying our faith. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record the same example. They give some different levels of detail about it. If you were here last week, remember that we talked about John Mark, and he was the guy probably who ran away naked when the soldier grabbed his cloak when Jesus was arrested that night. He was the guy that got homesick and bailed on his first mission trip halfway through it. But the conclusion of that is that he did apply his faith really well later on in life. And so, of the three accounts of this story, this event, John Mark gives the greatest detail about this faith story. And there might be some reason to that, because he grew so much in his faith. So we're going to look at Mark 9, verses 14 through 29. We're going to work our way through a pretty big passage. So I encourage you to pull out your Bible or a Bible app. If you don't have either of those, somebody could run and grab a few extra copies of the Bible if you would like that. Just raise your hand if you would like a Bible to look at if you don't have one with you. So we're going to look up at Mark 9. Mark is the second book of the New Testament. And if you're unfamiliar with it, you can look at the table of contents and ask your neighbor for help. So the context right before this event is that Jesus had just taken Peter and James and John up to a mountaintop, and Jesus revealed His glory to them, and his clothes and His body were transfigured, so they got a glimpse of his true glory of Jesus. And then not only that, but the spirits of Moses and Elijah just like showed up and were having this conversation with Jesus. And then the Father's voice boomed, and thundered, and said, "This is my son, listen to him." So, like, talk about a mountaintop experience. Like, those three disciples had this awesome mountaintop experience. And then Jesus and those, Peter, James, and John, go down the mountain to regroup with the rest of the disciples. And this is the situation they come upon when they find him. So, Mark 9, starting at verse 14. Since when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." So we're going to put it on pause there for a moment. Here's the situation. The 9 other disciples had tried to cast out a demon, and they failed. And somehow that turned into a big argument with the scribes, and this crowd gathers because like it's a spectacle, and they're amused by it. So that's what you want to return to when you come off of a mountaintop experience, right? No, not really. So at this point, it seems like it's a bit more heated than meh, but it's still a great example of they weren't applying their faith, and that's what we're looking at. So why did those disciples even think they could cast out a demon? Because Jesus said they could. Twice earlier in that same book, in Mark 3:5 and Mark 6, verse 7, it says Jesus gave them authority to cast out demons. And in Mark 6:13, it specifically says that they did, and they had success casting out demons. And so, but they couldn't do it this time. It didn't work. And the argument probably started, and the scribes started questioning their authority. You're trying to cast out demons, it's not working, you don't really have the authority, and probably started questioning the authority of their teacher, Jesus. And things got heated. Maybe the disciples started pointing to each other and blaming one another why it didn't go right. And, the crowd is amused because there's this big fight happening, and they just want to watch and be entertained by it. So let's pick up in verse 19. He answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. Bring the boy to me." We'll pause again. So Jesus is frustrated, and I don't blame him. He had just shared the ultimate mountaintop experience with his 3 best friends, and they get back to find the rest of the disciples powerless and picking fights. It's not a good scenario. So Jesus calls out the problem. He says, "Oh, faithless generation." And the word generation there could mean generation, it could be nation, it could be people. So the problem was a lack of faith among God's people. And hanging out with Jesus, the disciples clearly had faith. They just weren't applying it well at that time. And Jesus is like, when am I going to be done with this? So we're picking up in verse 20. And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy. He fell on the ground, rolled around, foaming at the mouth, and Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And it's not funny, but it's kind of funny to me. Like, this kid's having a demon-incited seizure, and Jesus is like, "How long has this been happening? Like, just stop it." But he's just watching it and chatting. But he doesn't leave him waiting long. The father answered, "From childhood," verse 22, "it often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Wrong choice of words to say to Jesus. Jesus said to him, if you can, seriously, if I can do anything about this. It says, all things are possible for the one who believes. All things are possible for the one who believes. So he points it back to faith. And listen how the man responds. Verse 24, immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. So he's saying, I have faith, I'm just struggling to apply it right now. I'm on the verge of losing hope about my son, and I'm at the end of my rope. I'm out of energy, and all that life is drained out, just kind of, meh, if you can help. But then he says, please help me apply my faith. Verse 25. When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse. And that's just a glimpse of the power that demons have. They're actually real, not just in the New Testament, but still today, that demons are real. But God's power is greater than that. So most of the crowd said, the boy's dead. Verse 27, but Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, the disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And I'll pause again before we conclude that passage. Jesus had already given the disciples authority to cast out demons. They'd had success before, and Jesus didn't remove that authority from them. So they're like, Jesus, what gives? Why didn't it work? The way they asked the question might give us a lead-in to Jesus' answer. They asked, why could we not cast it out? Emphasis on the we part of it. I mean, it worked before. We were starting to think, man, we're pretty awesome. We can cast out demons, and we wanted to impress Jesus while he was up on the mountain, cast out this demon, and it didn't work. So verse 29, Jesus said to them, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. He says the problem is that you're relying on your own ability instead of tapping into God's ability. John Mark definitely wrote the most detailed account here. It includes a lot of details that the other accounts didn't have. But Matthew's account adds one detail that Mark's didn't have. And Matthew expanded on Jesus' answer at the end. So Matthew 17, if you flip back one book, Matthew 17, verses 19 through 20, says, then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? He said to them, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like the grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. So Jesus actually gave both those answers to the disciples when they asked that question. Mark and Matthew just recorded different details about it. So thinking about them together gives us the best answer to apply our faith. Why could we not cast it out? Mark and Matthew phrase that question exactly the same, the way the disciples asked it. Jesus answered, I'm paraphrasing here, because of your itty-bitty faith. You have faith, you just weren't employing it. Rather, you were placing it in yourselves instead of in God. And Jesus said that faith, even as small as a mustard seed, can do amazing things. And how big is a mustard seed? If you take a Sharpie marker, I have a few in my pocket, and just kind of tap it to the back of your hand, just really lightly, that dot is about the size of a mustard seed. And I want you to go ahead and do that. Go ahead and take the marker and put a dot on there, pass it around. Just make sure those get back to the welcome table so we can keep using them for name tags. So, I'm going to come back around to that dot. So Jesus is saying, if we employ faith, just the size of this mustard seed, if we employ that much faith in God rather than in our own abilities, He'll move mountains for us. The power's in Him, not in us. We can't move mountains, but God can. And then when we bring that back together with what Mark said about Jesus' answer, this kind of only comes out by prayer. That gives us the answer for tonight's topic. We started by saying the best cure for meh is to apply my faith. Well, how do I apply my faith? Here's the second part. Best way to apply my faith is to ask God to do something bigger than me. Best way to apply my faith is to ask God to do something bigger than me. The reason we feel meh about anything truly important is probably because we're not thinking outside ourselves at that point. The reason I feel blah or bored or lazy about anything is because I'm focused on how I'm feeling at that moment. When we think beyond ourselves and ask, what does God want here? Or how could these people be blessed? Or how can I take part in expanding God's kingdom? That's when God gives us passion and energy to pursue something, instead of just being blind. And that's when He gives us the power to doing that. When we seek His power to accomplish it, He'll start moving mountains. That's the solution to men. Does that mean if we employ faith, that God is always going to answer yes to all our requests? Does that mean He'll always answer them immediately? No, it doesn't. God can see a million factors that are involved that we have no idea about, and He will answer in His wisdom and according to His will. So when we ask things, even in faith and asking for God to move His power, sometimes the answer will still be no. Sometimes the answer will be not yet. But a lot of times, the answer will be yes. And just think about if we fail to pray those prayers, how many times is He going to answer yes to that? None. If we're not asking the prayer, He's not going to answer it. So, and if I don't see God at work around me, maybe it's because I'm not asking Him to work powerfully around me. Here's our challenge. When you see that mustard seed dot on the back of your hand over the next few days, ask God to do something that only God could do. So when you're looking at your hands, whatever, there's that dot. Right then, ask God to do something that only God can do. And maybe that'll be asking for someone to commit to Jesus. Maybe someone you've almost given up on. Maybe it'll be ask God to grow this ministry in numbers and in depth and in impact. We have a campus of 9,000 to 10,000 people, so there's lots and lots of opportunity for growth, for impact, but that's not going to happen unless God gives the growth. Are we asking Him for that? Maybe it involves a community church. Maybe it involves a cause. Maybe it involves a roommate situation or a family situation. Maybe you need deliverance from bondage to some stronghold in your life. Ask God to do something that you can't. And of course, as we're thinking about those, you don't have to limit it to one thing. You're asking Him to do something big. You can do multiple things. So what might happen if this group of 50-some applies that this week, over the next few days? If several times you ask God to do something that only God could do, maybe we'll see God start to move mountains around us. The best cure for men is to apply my faith. And the best way to apply my faith is to do something, just to ask God to do something bigger than me. Let me pray. God, you are the source.